giving you a little recap of what happened in terms of Article 370 yesterday as well. The Supreme Court has asked the Centre for a roadmap to restore statehood of Jammu and Kashmir. It agrees division was needed for national security. So the government says that division of Jammu and Kashmir was needed for national security. I'm just going to read out some of the quotations for you to understand what essentially the debate was like. Yesterday it was the 12th day, today is going to be the 13th day of Article 370's hearing in the Supreme Court. Restoration of democracy, very important for survival of nation. Equally, restoration of democracy is a very important component for the survival of the nation. We are conscious of the fact that these are matters of national security. We understand that ultimately the preservation of the nation itself is the overriding concern. Why is it not possible for the union government to say, as there is an extreme situation in terms of national security, it wants for a certain period of time to create a union territory, but this is not a permanent feature. One cannot lay down a strict time period, but I think the government has to make a statement before us that the reversion of the union territory to a state will take place. This coming in from the SC bench. Now, the Supreme Court has flagged green concerns on GM mustard as well, completely different topic. But in terms of Supreme Court, I think the Indian Express has put it out really nicely. It says, before Supreme Court in Article 370 case, constitutionality of CO 272 and CO 273. Now, validity of CO 272. What are the key grounds of the challenge? Key grounds of challenge. Number one is validity of CO 272. The petitioners argued that Article 370 had become a permanent feature of the Constitution that could not be made inoperable. Senior advocate Kapil Sibal argued that the provision is referred to as temporary provision, not because it can be terminated by the President, but because the provision gave the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir the power to recommend changes to Article 370 until the state's constitution was enacted. Once the Constituent Assembly ceased to exist, which it did, the President could not have by order revoked Article 370, is what Kapil Sibal argued. Now, the petitioners also discussed Article 147 of the Jammu and Kashmir Constitution, which states that no bill or amendment seeking to make any change in the provisions of the Constitution of India as applicable in relation to the state shall be introduced or moved in either house of the legislature. I'll read out point number 3. The petitioners argued that since the J&K Constitution explicitly prohibited even moving any bill to change the application of the Indian Constitution of the state, CO 272, which is the President's order of 2019, cannot confer on the Legislative Assembly power to recommend abrogation of Article 370. Therefore, neither the J&K Assembly nor the Parliament could have undone Article 370. Point number 4, ladies and gentlemen. In the second part of that argument, a case was made that Article 367 has inherent limitations to be used to issue CO 272. The petitioners argued that an interpretative provision cannot be used for what is virtually an amendment, which essentially means the political will of the people being carried out through an executive act. Now, the validity of CO 273, just one point, take a look at this. The petitioners argued that Rajya Sabha cannot assume powers on behalf of the governor even under Article 356 that the Legislative Assembly itself does not have. Article 356 states that during President's rule, powers of the legislature of the state shall be exercisable by or under the authority of the Parliament. Sibal argued, quote unquote, if you in principle say that Parliament can invert itself into a constituent assembly, then where do we go on from there? Forget about this case. I am far more worried about the future of this country. So, well, that's a recap.
What Sibal was trying to argue is that if the Parliament is going to become the de facto legislative person, then one of the things that, the Parliament de facto legislature body, if the local legislature is under suspension, then the issue is that what he said, that they can assume the powers of other state legislatures as well. That's why it's not only a case about Jammu and Kashmir, but also about whether other state legislatures' powers also can be subsumed by the Parliament. That is an aspect that he has raised. But interestingly enough, one small thing that I also noticed when we are talking about it, on seeing a time frame, when we said that the Supreme Court wanted to in fact have a time frame on whether it will be made into a state, we are conscious of the fact that these are matters of national security, and that's why we don't want to bind you down to the timeline. Is there some time frame in view? Basically, they're saying that, of course, we're not expecting an
Jammu and
immediate
Kashmir
timeline.
statehood.
Yeah, you
But
have
come
to
out with a
timeline. Basically, so you're talking about timeline. Also, Kabir, now there is this contentious question about how Ladakh will it remain still a union territory, or only the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir will have the potential to become a future state. That, I think,
absolutely. Those are questions that now, of course, the Solicitor General will have to answer again today. Rolling coverage, tune into News 9 for rolling coverage right out of courtroom number 1 of Supreme Court.